everyone. Welcome to the Bread of Life channel. I am here with Sydney Davis, Jr., comedian and host of the podcast Growing Up Fundie. And so I'm really excited Sydney's here, and I would love for you to check out her comedy. It's on Amazon, and it's really good. And her channels, her podcast, the links are in the description. And I've had a good laugh. So please do check that out. Did you want to tell us anything else about like projects you're working on right now?
Oh man, yeah. So Growing Up Fundie is pretty much like the biggest thing I'm doing right now. It's just talking to people and getting episodes out. I also teach stand-up classes. So if anybody's in the Nashville area and they go to Third Coast Comedy Club, I teach stand-up classes there as well and storytelling on occasion. But Growing Up Fundie is pretty much the big thing right now. It took off a little bit last year, so now I'm trying to just keep that momentum going because I'm really enjoying doing it. So as long as the comments are nice and people are enjoying listening to it, I'm just like, I'm going to ride that wave until they get tired of me.
Awesome. Well, and Sydney had me on Growing Up Fundie, and that was really fun. We enjoyed that talk last week, so you guys can check that out if you want. And so Sydney, I don't know where this conversation is going to go, but I wanted to start with just saying, okay, fill in the blank. Growing Up Fundie
Growing Up Fundie was an idea that became a product, an idea that became, I don't want to say a product, a podcast, I'll say. Yeah. So my claim to fame is that I grew up with the Duggars. That's like, I tell everybody that, even people who don't even know who that is. I'm like, I grew up with the Duggars. Did you know that? I grew up with them. I had the same piano teacher. They went to the same church as me before they started their own family church, before they were on TV. And so when I started the podcast, I was telling somebody a funny story about how they were like better piano players than me at a recital or something like that. And my friend was like, have you ever told anyone this story? And I was surprised that I hadn't, because as I told you, I've been doing stand-up for 15 years. Like, if it is funny, I have milked it. And I kind of realized, I was like, no, I haven't told anybody that story. And he said, did you grow up religious? And I was like, yeah, I did. And then telling them that story kind of gave me this idea. I was like, well, I've met a lot of people over the years who grew up religious. They grew up either fundamentalist or evangelical or in a totally different religion, but on the far left or right side of those different religions. And I'm curious what their thoughts are too, because also anytime I would mention something about growing up religious to an audience, a lot of people would laugh because they also grew up religious. And so they understood that bit, whether they were still religious, where they were no longer religious. I noticed that was something that really connected a lot of people. Lots and lots of people really related to that childhood. Even the people who are still devoutly religious, they would still laugh when I talked about Veggie Tales, when I talked about Sunday school or Wednesday night service, or different hymns that we would sing, or just experiences that I had, like Awanas. Random people would be like, oh my gosh, you just unlocked a core memory for me. And so I started the podcast having no desire to make it related to comedy in any way. Because, every comedian has a podcast. Every comedian's got a YouTube channel, and that's fine. And I have fun doing that stuff. But I wanted to do something that really focused on people and their experiences. And those experiences aren't always funny. Sometimes those experiences are kind of sad or scary or regretful in some way, or they learned a very important lesson. And the more people that I met, especially people close to me who I had no idea we related on that level, the more I just became interested in hearing their stories.
Very cool. Now, I'm sure I've heard of the Duggars. Is this the people with like a bunch of kids?
Yeah, they were on 19 Kids and Counting, and then I think 20 Kids and Counting was the last season. And then their oldest kids have spinoffs of like Counting On, I think was the most recent one, something like that.
Okay, so tell us some fun tidbits from growing up with the Duggars.
So we all grew up in Northwest Arkansas. So I'm from Arkansas originally, and they lived in a town with me called Springdale, Arkansas. It's where my mom grew up. It's where my dad grew up. It's where all their friends are from. And so that's where the church was. But also there was this restaurant called AQ Chicken House. And on either Wednesday or Thursday nights, kids got to eat for 25 cents. You'd get like a full kids meal. So of course they were there, right? Like, of course they would be there. And I think I like to tell people, I think there were only like 10 of them at the time because this was early 90s. But I remember we had the same piano teacher, and one day we had a piano recital, and I was probably 10. So their oldest girls were same age as me. Maybe one was a year younger and one might have been a year older. And I get up and I play, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, Mary Had a Little Lamb, that sort of thing. I probably botched it. And then they get up and they play this just immaculate music. They're just fingers flying, they're using the pedals. I didn't even know what those pedals were for yet, and they're just making this beautiful music, and they're just astounding everyone. And they're so humble, they get up and they just are very thankful for the opportunity, and they go sit down. And I looked at my mom and I was like, how do they do that? How do they get that good? What do you think it is that makes them that good? And I thought that my mom was going to say something like, the glory of God, or like the Lord's blessings or something, right? Because like that's what moms were supposed to say. Yeah. And she looks at me and she's like, well, they probably practice. So there's that. And you should try it. Right? She just like roasted me in the house of the Lord. Roasted.
Oh, wow. So she didn't make you practice at home?
She tried. She tried as much as you can try without like literally restraining a child. Piano is one of those things where I was good at it until somebody made me do it, and then I just didn't want to do it anymore. Then I just didn't want to. Yeah, it was, I don't know. I have ADHD, so maybe that's part of it too. Who knows? But the drive was not there. I did not want to practice.
Do you ever play now?
No. I'm trying to think. So I played the cello when I was a kid. Honestly, I do sometimes wish I'd kept it up because I love music. And my mom told me, she's like, one day you're going to wish you'd practice, and I'm going to rub this in your face that you didn't. I tried the cello for a while in high school, really enjoyed it, but the cello belonged to the high school. So I had to give it back to the high school, and I just never got around to getting one. I could play the harmonica, but
cool.
Yeah, but no, I have an appreciation for music, but I don't really play music.
Okay. Well, so what was your experience like? Because you yourself grew up, in a fundamentalist church. So what were the like most memorable things about that experience for you?
Yeah, so it's very interesting because I grew up in like Southern Baptist, what a lot of people might consider like evangelical fundamentalist, right? But my family was not at all. And so I remember some of my earliest memories are actually asking questions about what was said in church and kind of getting my mom's opinion. For example, I remember one day they did a sermon about women not preaching and how it's not a woman's job to preach. It's not a woman's job to lead to the Lord. And that her job is to sit at the feet of her husband and support his message. But I knew, here's the thing though, my mom is a kick butt lady. My mom doesn't take nothing from nobody. She raised me as a single mom. My dad actually died when I was 1. So she doesn't take attitude. So the minute I heard that, even at 10 years old, I was like, I don't think my mom agrees with this. And so I was looking at her face and she wasn't really reacting. And so then after church, I remember I asked my mom, I said, do you believe that? Like, do you believe that ladies aren't supposed to tell people to like come to church and lead them to the Lord, and they're not supposed to preach? And my mom was like, you know how sometimes when we meet up with our family, we have a couple uncles or cousins who say something that's just like a little bit crazy, just a little bit, just like like what they're saying is not right, but because you love them and because you don't want to start like an argument right there in front of everybody, you just kind of let them say it, but then you don't take it home, you don't agree with it. And I was like, yeah. And she goes, yeah, church can be like that sometimes too. Church can be. She goes, so do you think as a woman that you could lead someone to the Lord? And I said, yeah, I think so. And she goes, okay. And so do you think that you could tell them enough about Jesus and the Bible that they would want to come to church and be a Christian? And I was like, yeah. And she goes, well, then that's what I think too. And she's like, and I think that's what God thinks too. But I think sometimes old men get their ideas a little bit mixed up and they don't always know 100% what they're talking about.
Wow.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so your mom didn't really fit in. Was that like the only way that she didn't really fit in?
So she, in a lot of churches, there's like, don't wear pants to church. She didn't believe that. She didn't believe that if we didn't go to church every Sunday and Wednesday, we were going to hell. She didn't believe that, if we didn't pray every single day, even though she does, she's quite devout. She didn't believe that like not praying every day would send you to hell or anything like that. She was not one of those revelations fear mongers, that think that the end of times is near all the time. She wasn't one of those people at all. She does believe that, you need to be saved. You need to ask the Lord Jesus into your heart. She does believe that in the power of prayer. She's very devout, but even she knows the difference between somebody who is spreading a good message versus somebody who's spreading the message they think that they read, and it's convenient for them to follow those rules, but that might not necessarily be the God that she believes. She believes in like a very, everybody has their own independent relationship with God, and if what you're doing makes God happy and serves God in the way that you need to serve God, then that counts. If you're praying, it doesn't matter what you're saying. If it's a rosary, it doesn't matter. As long as you're praying and you're devout and you worship God in the way that you feel worship happens, then that counts.
Okay, cool. So, when we had our conversation on your channel, you kind of talked about hell and how much this was drilled into you about hell, and now you just mentioned it. So this is really strange to me because it's not really part of my church experience anywhere I've been. But I know a lot of people have this experience of like churches telling them that they're going to hell.
Yes.
Like, so they were really teaching you that if you didn't go to church on Sunday and Wednesday, you were going to go to hell?
Yeah. So church was very much like any social gathering where there's always like the set of parents who are way more strict than the other parents. And then there's the parents that are more liberal, And so while the church itself did teach about hell, like they definitely taught about hell, they definitely thought hell was a real thing. There's fire, it's eternal, it's damnation. If you don't atone for your sins, that's where you go. If you're not saved, that's where you go. It was more the individual parents who taught like what sends you to hell. So like my mom never once told me that if you were gay, you went to hell. That was never a thing. Didn't even know about it. But I do remember growing up with kids whose parents were very clear on like, don't honor your mom and your dad, you're going to hell. Like if you don't come to church, you're going to hell. And I remember being friends with them and thinking that was so strange. And again, having those conversations with my mom, like, so is their mom right or is their dad right? Like, what do you think? And my mom would always say something to the effect of, I don't think scaring your kids is ever right. Whether the message is clear or the message is true, who knows? But I don't think that being mean to your kid and scaring them into doing what you want them to do is right in any degree. And my mom has never claimed to know 100% what's right or what's wrong, but she does believe in hell, for sinners and people who are wicked. But yeah, that was a thing. I remember if you weren't saved, you went to hell. I remember asking, what about like people in Africa who've never heard of God? Do they go to hell? Well, I mean, if they're not saved, I guess they do. Or, and I know in some religions they believe if you're like an unbaptized baby, you go to a different place than other places, like the purgatory or something. We didn't have that. You didn't get baptized until you were like 9 or 10, or even an adult in at least Southern Baptist religion. But yeah, hell was a real thing. I remember worrying about hell. I remember wondering what kind of behavior would get me into hell. It wasn't necessarily if I listen to this song or if I watch this movie, I'm going to hell. It's more like if I keep disobeying my mom, God's going to know. And there's like tallying, they're keeping points somewhere. And I either need to ask forgiveness or be ready to be judged at the gates or be ready to answer for my sins. So whether or not I still go to hell, that's within question, but God's going to ask me about this and he's going to play me this video of my whole life and all the sins I ever committed. And he's going to want to know, he's going to ask me about it. And I'm going to need to be prepared to answer that. Oh, you're on mute. I can't hear you.
Sorry. What are your thoughts about that now?
I don't believe in hell. I don't. And I think that anyone who claims to truly believe something, but believes it out of fear, doesn't actually believe that. I think that they think they do. I think there's a lot of people who truly think that they are Christian believers. And I think we talked a little bit about this when I spoke to you last time about how you can really tell if somebody believes something or if somebody is kind of forced into believing something. I agree with my mom. I think scaring your kids at any point is just, that's not true belief. That's just fear. Even if I did still believe in hell, I would think that there's a much different way to get that message across. And I think some people truly believe in hell, and they're so scared of it, and they're so terrified that they or their kids are going to go to hell, that they're desperate to get that message out, and they're desperate to teach their kids not to go there. And then other people don't necessarily believe in hell, but they see it as a way to get everybody to behave. So that's why they preach hell. They're not 100% sure where we're going, but they know if they say you're going to burn for eternity if you don't do what they say, everybody's going to do what they say. And so I don't believe in hell, but I also think that a lot of people believe in the version of Christianity, the Christianity that they believe in, because they're afraid of hell, not because in their heart of hearts they truly believe that's the truth, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yep. That makes sense. Wow. Okay. So what were the other aspects of your religious upbringing that impacted your life in, bad ways, good ways?
Yeah. So the good ways, I'm from the South, and a lot of the greatest people you'll ever meet will be, as they say, God-fearing Christians, washed in the blood of the Lamb. So church was always a very familial place to be. My mom grew up very, very poor. And some of the stories of her being helped, being, fed meals and things like that, or being included or being taken care of, were people from the church. So I absolutely think that when treated correctly, the church can be a very great thing for exactly what the Bible says it should be, for those who are in need and those who are lost. And again, like my best friend, devout Christian, right? She's a devout Christian. Her husband to be is a devout Christian. Nicest people. They would give you the shirt off their back, but they would also do that if God wasn't watching, right? Like they would also, those are the people that I think are what I like about the church. The people who, yes, they do what God says, right? But they also do things because that's just morally what you're supposed, like they don't want to kill anybody. They don't want to commit adultery. They even if they found out tomorrow that God wasn't real, they would still be really good, kind people. I think a lot of people think if God wasn't real, if they decided that, to become an atheist or something, that the world would just fall apart, like the Left Behind movies from the 90s, like the world would just catch on fire. But I think you would be surprised at how many people are actually very moral, nice, kind people that also happen to be Christian. And that if they found out tomorrow God wasn't real, they might have a little bit of a meltdown, because that's a big thing to say to somebody, but then they would still be moral, just, kind, good people. And that's one of the things I like about the church, is it elevates that behavior in people. Some of the things that I wasn't a fan of in church was, for example, like purity culture. I know that does a lot of harm to a lot of people. I remember I made out with a guy for the first time, and I thought for sure I was just unclean. I was just impure. I was disgusting, right? Didn't take any clothes off or anything. We just kissed a little too much. And I just remember the next day feeling like just awful about myself, feeling awful about him. It just ruined the whole experience, because I just felt like we'd done something so bad. And then he told somebody about it, and I just felt like, the town prostitute. It was just like the worst feeling. But none of that had to do with the way he made me feel. It all had to do with the way that I was told in church that I should feel about having done. And I was 21 years old. I was an adult. I wasn't like a teenager sneaking out or anything. So I feel like I got off really, really easy in terms of the religious trauma that a lot of people face, people who are still devoutly religious and people who aren't. But I've heard, especially through my podcast, I've heard a lot of people talk about a lot of trauma related to what they were taught in their particular denomination.
Yeah.
And I just think there should be a lot more resources out there for people who would like to seek mental health help, even if they don't want to deconstruct from the church, even if they want to stay within the church. I think that's actually even more important, is like mental health from people who are not pastors, who are not their church deacons. They're totally, completely unrelated to the church, but still there to offer help, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. So did you feel like most of the churches in your area were similar to yours?
Yeah. Most were Baptist. We had some
Mhm.
Presbyterian, some Methodist, a few Pentecostals. We'd see the Pentecostals, we'd be like, there they are with their long hair, But I would say most were either Baptist, Methodist, Pentecostal, Presbyterian, or a couple of Catholic churches. Now there's more because a lot more people have moved into that area. But Catholic was like the weirdest you got in that area.
Yeah. What was the thought about Catholicism? Was it they're going to hell?
Actually, no, surprisingly. And
Oh,
as I've
really?
gotten older and I've done episodes of the podcast, I didn't realize how many religions think other religions are going to hell. We didn't really talk about them much.
Okay.
But I remember my cousins grew up Catholic, and I remember asking my mom, like, does that count as Christian? And she was like, yeah, like as long as they're praying the way they feel like they should pray, and we're praying the way we feel like we should pray, it all counts as prayer. And that was the extent of it. But I had no idea until I was an adult that there are religions that say like even other forms of Christianity are not okay, and they are basically the devil's work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so what are the other features of that you think are like particular to your upbringing? Hell, and then like, is there anything else that was like, was it young earth creation? Were you taught young earth creation?
No. So I remember being taught that evolution shouldn't be taught in school. You pick up like what parents
Yeah.
talk about. I remember people saying like, oh, evolution shouldn't be taught in school. Like that should be up to the parents to teach. But I remember I met one kid who was a young earth creationist. And I met him in science class, but he was the only one that I knew. And I remember him like not wanting to participate in the science project we were doing because it was about dinosaurs. And he's like, this isn't real. Like, this doesn't make any sense. And he was the first one I'd ever met that was like that. And I remember, I think I asked my mom about him too, but she'd never met a young earth creationist too, so she wasn't really sure. She probably said something to the effect of it had something to do with his religion. But I remember thinking in the back of my mind to be wary of evolution. I don't remember who told me that, and I don't remember when. I know it wasn't my mom, but we had like Veggie Tales. We had, I think, the hallmarks of Southern Baptist versus other religions is we have the old country theme aspect. So like the hymns are the same hymns that my family sings on the mountain. So my family is from the Ozark Mountains. We've been there for so long that it's a national park, but we can still live there because we were there first.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Like well Wiccan, all way back. I don't even know if we know how far our family goes back beyond that because we've just been living in the mountains for so long that even if I did like 23andMe, it would probably just say, I don't know, mountains, like who knows? And even like our family members who are into genealogy, it all just leads back to families on the mountain. And so we have a lot of those old hymns, those old verses, it's a very, very old country vibe to it, where it's like the women are women, the men are men, the wives get married real young, the husbands lead the households, you have as many kids as you can, right? Not quite to the extent of like the Quiverful movement, not quite there. They never told you like you had to have a bunch of kids. It was just, why would you stop having kids if God keeps giving you kids? And so I think that was the main difference, is everything was rooted in very old tradition. Even the food we ate, even the casserole on Sundays, that was all just rooted in super old Southern tradition, where I feel like some of these other denominations I hear about are a lot younger, or they come from a different place, or they're much more Northern, or they're European, or something to that effect. But ours was very much like, for anybody who's ever seen Oh Brother, Where Art Thou by the Coen brothers, that's very much like what my church experience was like growing up.
I haven't seen it, so I don't know.
I highly recommend it. It's one of my favorite movies.
Oh wait, oh brother, where art thou? Oh,
Yeah.
I for some reason it sounded like you said something different. Yeah. That's a great movie.
Yeah. So it's very much what it
Cool.
was like. Yeah.
Awesome. And so then what happened in your life that got you into comedy?
Um, that's a great question. So when I wanted to do comic books my whole life. Like when I was a kid, my dream was to have like a syndicated comic in the Sunday paper.
Mm.
And then one day when I was I think I was in 7th grade, I was watching Saturday Night Live. And I thought to myself, like, that's so funny that somebody gets to do this as a job. What a cool job. And then I thought to myself, somebody gets to do that as a job. Wait a second. How do you get that job? Like, that's a real job. And so then I looked into it, and I found out about this improv theater called the Second City in Chicago, which is a major feeder for SNL. A lot of the people who are famous that started on SNL also started there at the Second City in Chicago. And there's also one in Toronto. We're talking like Mike Myers, all these famous people started there. Like the list goes on. It's just unreal. And so I started taking improv there when I was in 11th grade. And about that time, the training center, because it was a theater, but it was also a training center where you could take classes, they called my mom and they were like, we haven't had enough students sign up for teen stand up. So we're putting Sydney in teen stand up. See you Thursday. See ya. Bye. And then I just started doing stand up because they made me. And I enjoyed it so much. I just kept doing it. And that was 15, almost 16 years ago. And so it was totally on accident. You know, most people have this story where they're like, oh, I watched Dave Chappelle and I was just totally changed. I saw, I had none of that. I literally was just forced to go to class. And then the class forced you to go out in the city and do it. And I enjoyed it so much that I never stopped. I kept doing it.
Wow. And do you have any aspiration about something like Saturday Night Live?
I would never say no. I would never say no. I actually know quite a few people who are on the cast or are writers right now, which is always super interesting. But if you had asked me like 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, where I saw my life going, I had a certain direction. And ever since then, so many wild twists and turns have happened to me since then, since 2019. I literally cannot tell you where I'm going to be. I have no idea. I'm not worried about it. I'm not afraid of it. I've been given some really cool opportunities the last few years, but that's one of them. Like if somebody were to say, hey, apply and you can get on, or if I applied and they sent me, an audition, I would absolutely do it. But I wouldn't feel the same way as when I was a kid where like, if I die without having ever been on SNL, then my life was worth nothing,
Yeah.
I would love to. I would love to do late night. I would love to, I don't know. I'm very much in any opportunity that comes. I'm super into it.
Do you feel like your passion is shifting away from comedy? Is that
Totally. I still love comedy. I'll still do comedy. And I always think that my passion is shifting away, and then I get a bug towards the end of the year and I just do a bunch of it. But it's weird. The podcast has just been so meaningful, and I've met so many people and I've heard so many lessons, and I've gotten so many comments from people that are like, I can't believe other people think the same way that I do, et cetera, that like comedy is fun, but I feel like this kind of content, like the content that you put out, makes a difference. It really makes a difference, and it really helps people. And there's people out there looking to watch stand-up comedy, and that's great. And there will always be comedians. But there's also people out here with like questions about their salvation and questions about what they're doing with their life and if they're going to hell. And to me, like getting messages from those people talking about how much comfort they find in certain guests that I have or certain lessons that we talk about, I don't know. To me, that just seems way more important right now. Maybe I'll feel differently soon. I don't think so.
Cool. Well, your comedy is really funny. Actually,
Thanks.
I went back to the very bottom of your YouTube because I like to
That's
see like
funny.
how people have progressed. And like the first video you have on there is you and your friend. It looks like you're in high school
Yes.
and you like did a little comedy act. It was really
Yes.
cute.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. That was improv in high school. Hey Alexa, we got second place at I think it was state. I think it was Arkansas State, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So then how did you convince your mom for the Chicago thing? Because that's quite a distance from Arkansas. So,
Yeah. So my brother and I, we've always been very, very driven people. We've always been those kids that were like way too serious, way too young, to the point where like
mhm.
some people were concerned about us, but my mom was like, no, they're passionate, just let them do their thing. So we were in competitive acting when we were kids, and there's an event called forensics in Arkansas and in a bunch of different states where it has nothing
Mhm.
to do with CSI, but for some reason it shares the same name. But it's competitive speech, competitive acting, and he was the state champion like every year that he did it, and he held the record for like the most points you could earn, like very competitive. I was the same way, just very, very competitive, but I was always writing my material for it, which you're not supposed to do. It's supposed to be from a book or a play or something published, but I just hated everything that I found out there, so I would write sketches based on like characters that I knew I could do or things that I knew I could talk about. Um, and so we've been doing this for a few years, and we were doing really well, especially when we could work together. We were doing really, really well. So my mom knew that we were hard workers. She knew that if we were passionate about something, even if you're 15 years old, like she knew that we would skip birthday parties, skip, Saturday night mall outings. Like we would work really hard for this stuff because we were
Mhm.
so passionate about it. And so we watched SNL, and I was like, how do you get that job? That's wild. We Googled it. We found out about Second City. We went and saw a show there Thanksgiving break one year. And then we went back the following spring break. So we'd seen 2 or 3 shows there at that point, and they were all just really fantastic shows. And my brother was going to college the next year. He had just graduated as a senior. He was going to college. And I was going into the 11th grade. And my mom said, she said, okay, I'll make you a deal. She said, if you keep your grades up and if you get a job, then I will take a sabbatical with my job and we can move to Chicago and you can train with the Second City and we can see how that works and if it's good for you and if it leads to what needs to be done for you. Because we had run into an actor from one of the shows at a Starbucks that's connected to
Mhm.
Second City, and I did the whole like fangirl thing, like stood beside him, didn't want to talk to him, but wanted to talk to him. So finally I walked up to him and I said, if you had advice for anybody who wants to do what you would do, or what you do for a living, what would you say to them? And he said, you've got to move here. You've got to move here. You've got to immerse yourself. You've got to train here. This will open so many doors for you. This is what you need to do. He's like,
Mhm.
if I could go back and give old me that same advice, I would do it. So that's when my mom said, okay, we'll do it for 1 year if you'll keep up your grades, keep a job. If your grades slip, we're going back to Arkansas. If you stop wanting to work because you want to like piddle around, we're going back to Arkansas. Like, and so my brother was like, well, you can't go without me. So he transferred schools to a school in Chicago, and we all three moved up there. And we spent the first year there, and it went really well. I was doing like improv, I was doing stand up. He was doing the same thing. He didn't do stand up, but he was taking writing classes. He was in college. He was doing improv as well. We were making a lot of really valuable connections with people and really building up just really great networking, like invaluable networking, people that I still talk to this day, and I still reach out for their opinions, 15 years later. But high school was not good. High school was not good there. I was getting bullied all the time. I remember
Mm.
this girl told me that she was going to make me do heroin by graduation. And I said, oh, no, thanks. Like, I don't do drugs. And she goes, did I ask you if you wanted to? I said, I'm going to make you. Right. Like, oh. And so I was really like withdrawing into myself. And the only time I
Mhm.
would ever speak is at comedy class. Like that was it. That was when I would talk. The rest of the time I just like kept to myself.
Wow.
Yeah. And so it was getting really ugly. There was a lot of like gang activity at the school that I went to. And so finally my mom asked me, she's like, will you please come back to Arkansas with me, finish high school there, and then you do what you want to do after that. But I can't justify putting you back in school here. It's just not a safe place to be. Like fights all the time in the hallways, people getting arrested, like their parents were actual gang members of like real gangs that you've heard of.
Yeah.
So I did. And then as soon as I could, I came back to Chicago, started right back up with Second City, started doing stand up all over again, and just took off from where I'd left off. And luckily, I'd met enough people when I was in high school that still remembered me at that point that I was able to start pretty much where I'd left off and take off from there. But yeah. And so she moved back to Arkansas that year when we all did. And she didn't go back. My brother still lives there. I moved back. And my brother's married. His spouse still lives there. And my boyfriend is from there. We didn't meet there, but he just happens to be from Chicago. We met here in Nashville.
Wow.
Yeah. And it just kind of went from there. And that guy that I met there at that Starbucks, 100% right. Like, it was invaluable to some of the opportunities I've had. And I think the training that I received there, and I started teaching there. I was a member of the faculty, which was wild because I was still friends with my teacher who I'd had in high school. So, 15 years later, we're still friends. Just invaluable. And I think that taught me a lot about how to talk to people and communicate with people now, especially like with the podcast. I think it taught me a lot about just meeting different types of people and how to communicate and how to listen to them and take what they're saying and repeat it back to them to let them know that I understood, how to kind of improvise and riff with them and, ask them questions off the fly that I didn't have planned, but I'm curious about now. Very valuable, super helpful.
Yeah. Wow. Cool. And so what got you into teaching comedy? Like what prompted that?
I feel like I'm maybe just really good at explaining things to people. I wanted to work there because I wanted to say I worked at Second City at first when I was a kid. I did stand up there and I did improv there, but I really wanted to be a member of the faculty because in my mind at the time, that was like the height of like prestige, if you work there. So they finally hired me when I was like 25. After I'd been spamming them with my resume, they're like, we're not going to hire you right out of high school. That's just not how this works. And I don't know. I really like teaching people. I would give students notes and you would just see like kind of the light bulb go off in their head. I realized as I started teaching there that people's lives aren't like mine. They don't have the support that I had. Their parents or their spouses or their siblings are always like, why do you want to do that? You shouldn't do that. Get a real job, blah, 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 blah. I had no idea how many people came from backgrounds that were not supportive at all in any way. And so just getting to be the person who can be the one support system in their lives. And they were older than me. I was 25 when I started teaching. And most of my students were mid-20s, 30s, 40s, some in their 60s, some in their 70s. And it's just cool because like when you can be the person who helps a 70-year-old lawyer actualize their dream of trying stand-up, it's just really cool. And so I learned, and I think that's also helped in terms of like interviewing people because I've learned so much about respecting people's backstories and their histories and their traumas and where they're coming from and understanding like if they're lashing out about something, it probably has nothing to do with you. It probably has something to do with something entirely different going on. I met a lot of really cool people. Like Jussie Smollett's lawyer was my student.
Who's that?
Do you remember Jussie Smollett, the guy from Empire who like pretended he got jumped a few years ago and it became like a huge court case?
Oh, okay. Yes. Yeah.
His lawyer was my student.
Oh my gosh.
One of my favorite people. So funny. Such a funny guy. But yeah. And so I've just been teaching ever since then. And I don't know, it's just something about teaching it. You know how whenever you're doing something and you can just click into your mind that it's what you're supposed to be doing. You don't know why, you can't really describe it, but it just clicks. It just fits in a way that you're like, this is where I belong. That's kind of how it feels, I guess.
Cool. And like, what are the things that you have learned from growing up Fundie? Like has it shaped your religious beliefs at all?
It really has. It really has. So I knew by the age of maybe 25 or 26 that I was very likely an atheist. But I don't think that I could articulate it at all in the same way that I can articulate it now, speaking to so many people who are also atheists or who started out religious and became atheists, or even people who are still very devoutly religious, but because of the conversation that we had, I can now, thanks to them and their kind of like their introduction to a lot of terminology that I didn't know existed, I can better explain why it is that I feel certain ways or how I came about those feelings, and I can also totally understand why other people are not. It's done a lot for empathy. Like I've never ever hated God or had a problem with religious people or anything like that, but I have a much better understanding for my thoughts and feelings, their thoughts and feelings, why they're the way they are, why I'm the way I am, what it really means to believe and to like pray and to feel and so it's definitely changed in a way that I just have a profound respect for people from all backgrounds, whether they agree with me or not. Some of the people I reach out to for advice on a daily basis are the complete opposite of me on paper in every way. And I feel like we've become just wonderful friends.
Wow, that's really cool. So what is it that you have respect for? Like when you say you have a profound respect for them, can you talk about some of the things that like cause that like respect in you?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. So when I've heard that this is common with other people, but at least in my experience, when I first became an atheist and you first start questioning and you first start Googling, most of what shows up is that debate stuff, that like, oh, Christian destroys atheist, atheist destroys Christian, like Christian uses the Bible to destroy this non-believer. It's all just very like in your face. And so you automatically feel defensive. You automatically feel like if anybody knows this about me, they're going to want to argue with me and they're going to want to debate me, and it's just going to be really scary. But I've met people who are devoutly religious who they obviously want me to find the Lord at some point, but they don't feel the need to proselytize to me. They're not becoming my friend in order to get me to come to church. They're not becoming my friend because they think they get points in heaven. Genuinely good, kind people who also are Christian. Same thing with atheists. I've met, because I used to think atheists were like scary people. I used to think like kind of like pot smokers, right? If you smoke pot or if you're an atheist, you're going to hell. But now I've met like atheists who are just really kind. They will never tell you they're an atheist if you don't ask. It just doesn't come up. And just very peaceful. And I've noticed also that a lot of us want the same things. We want the same things. We're just coming to those needs from different directions. Like we don't want people to suffer. We don't want bad things to happen to good people. We all wish that there's something beautiful after life. We all wish that there's like this beautiful, gorgeous heaven. Some of us believe it, some of us don't, right? The ones of us who don't, we hope we're wrong, right? A lot of us hope we're wrong about that. Like, I hope that when I die, I find out that heaven is a real place and everybody I've ever loved has gotten to go there, right? Or anybody who for whatever the criteria is you needed to meet to get there. I hope everybody met that criteria. I hope that I'm wrong. And so I think a lot of us have a lot of those things in common. We want a peaceful life. We want a wonderful life. We want people to stop having to get sick and like spend all their money finding treatments. We want everyone to get the education that they desire. We want everyone to just live a better life. Some people are just approaching it from a religious aspect, and other people are approaching it from a more worldly, secular, what do I have to do on this earth because this is the only chance I have to do it type thing.
Yeah. Wow. And what do you think caused you to decide like I'm an atheist? Or what brought you to that belief?
I'd had questions for a while, questions that I was really like pushing in the back of my mind because I was very defensive. So when I was growing up, one of the hallmarks of the churches that I grew up in was that if you are questioning the Lord at all, that's the devil. The devil is going to like wheedle into your mind. He's going to cause you to ask questions. He's going to cause you to question your faith. And some of the questions are going to seem like really good questions, but don't fall for it. That's the devil, right? So for years, I thought that's what was happening. I thought like, oh no, this is what they told me about. This is the devil coming for me. He's trying to make it seem really attractive to question and to have these thoughts and ideas, but I'm going to ignore it. And then, truth be told, I did some psychedelic mushrooms and I asked myself questions while I was tripping on these shrooms that I just could not ignore anymore. I just couldn't ignore them. And luckily I wrote them all down. And the next morning I was like, these are still really important questions. These are still big deals to you in terms of what doesn't make sense, like what isn't adding up, how it makes you feel to still go to church, things like that, the things that you've brought into question. And, when you were on my podcast, we talked about belief and we talked about how belief is genuine, right? And I just no longer believed that God was reality. It's not because I hated him. It's not because I wanted to not go to church anymore. I just realized in my mind, for what was the truth to me, I just didn't have enough evidence to support that heaven was real, that hell was real, that God was real in the way that the Bible says that he's real. But at the same time, I completely believe people who believe in God. I 100% believe that it is a reality to them, right? It's just like you can't make something be your favorite color. You can't make something taste good to you. You can try, right? You can get like over it a little bit, but at the end of the day, you know, if you just don't like something or if you don't feel like you look good in something, it's just not your reality, no matter how much of a reality it is for everybody else and for people that you really care about.
So do you think the questions that came out of your experience with mushrooms, did they shape that reality, or was the reality already there? It was just not admitted.
The reality was there. Yeah, great question. The reality was there. I just wasn't admitting to it. The reality is there. The questions had always been there. The doubt had been there. The curiosity had been there. But I was not allowing myself to think about it because that was the devil tempting me. And this forced me to be like, you have these questions. Here they are. They've always been here. Look at them. Stop ignoring them. How do you feel about it? Be honest. Like, stop lying to people. Because I felt like any time that I tried to get somebody to like come to church with me or tried to get somebody to like sit next to me in church, I felt like I was lying to them when they would be like, oh, like, don't you love this passage, or don't you believe that, or, you know, raise your hand if this. I just felt like I was lying. And so it wasn't that I went to church and I was just unhappy at church the whole time. It was I was actively lying. And if God's real, then that is also not a good thing to do. Like, he wouldn't want me to also sit there and lie in his name and, you know, and basically blaspheme by claiming that I love him so much and this is how it looks to love God when I maybe didn't.
Wow, that's really interesting experience. I don't know if I've talked to anyone who's had that kind of experience.
Yeah.
Have you talked to other people who had that kind of experience where they felt like they were lying to themselves?
Yes, I have. And most of them, it has more to do with like a sexuality standpoint. Most of the people I've talked to who are like that, it was because maybe they were gay or maybe they were lesbian and they weren't admitting it because they knew that wouldn't fly in their church. Most of them, it's like that, or it's something to do with their identity. But I've met a couple of people who were like me that were like, man, I've just had these questions, not going to think about it, not going to think about it. Finally, you're forced to think about it. And the way that I was forced to think about it wasn't scary at all. When I thought about it before, I was scared. I was like, oh no, this is the devil. I'm going to hell. This is it. I'm opening those gates. I can feel the flames already, you know? And as much as that sounds like a joke, at the same time, when you're taught that like hell is real and you will burn forever if you reject God's name, you know, there's a couple of verses that talk about like denying God, right? And so if you deny Christ, he will deny you. And when I was growing up, they taught you like, if somebody asks you if you're a Christian and you say no, that's denying Christ, and Christ is going to deny you too. So when I was sober, that was like the scariest thing I'd ever thought of. But when I was having this experience, it was actually really comforting, and it was like allowing me to kind of go through those thoughts in a more relaxed, like, are you sure? Are you positive? Let's think about this for a second. Let's weigh out our options here. It was a much different experience. It sounds like it would have been really scary, but it was actually the opposite of how scary the reality version was, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you mind sharing your questions with us?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. So a lot of them are probably going to be non-unique to things you've heard before, but just the whole, you know, if God's real and he really is watching us and he really does care about us, why did my dad drop dead? Right? Like my mom was a devout Christian her whole life. My dad was raised a devout Christian. And, you know, I know people hate this trope. I get this from a lot of my religious friends a lot. They hate it when people say, you know, everything happens for a reason. But I remember people would say that. And I'm like, what's the reason? Like, my mom's already devout. She already serves the Lord. My dad already served the Lord. Like, what could they possibly learn from this experience? So that was one of them. It was like, if God really loves me, why did he do that? Like, why would he do that to the people I love the most? there's the whole thing that a lot of people say where it's like, if God is real and he really cares, why do things like the Holocaust happen? Why do wars happen? Why do babies die? Which I think is a very generalized question. And I don't expect anybody to answer all of those things in one. I'm sure
Right.
I've heard many, many nuanced responses to that. But just things like that. Most of it had to do with there's also like contradictions in the New Testament versus the Old Testament. And you're like, okay, which version do I go by? Or another thing that I got a lot was if something was spelled out pretty clearly in the Bible, somebody would say, no, that's a metaphor. That's not actually what that means. But if something was a metaphor in the Bible, somebody would say, no, what he means is that he hates gay people. That's what that says. And it was difficult for me to say, how do we know which parts are metaphors and which parts are very clearly spelled out into how we should live? Who gets to dictate that? And then when I was a little kid, I used to go and watch Benny Hinn. I used to travel like across the state of Texas to go see Benny Hinn live. So, like when he went to jail, it was like, it's like, oh no, like who do I listen to if I can't even trust Benny Hinn? So yeah, a few things like that or you would meet somebody who was a pastor and then you would see them do something really mean. And you're just like, did God see that? Like God saw that, right? Is that allowed? We're not allowed to say anything because he's the pastor. Stuff like that, where it just like didn't really add up in my mind. And I know not all Christian denominations believe the same things. I know that the anti-gay rhetoric is really I think it's going away. I feel like that's really on its way out. I think people are really opening their eyes to loving your neighbor means loving your neighbor, whether he's married to a man or a woman. I've met a lot of very progressive Christians who give me so much hope for the future of Christianity, for the future of anybody who calls themselves like a believer. I think that millennials and Gen Z are doing a really fantastic job of kind of changing the way that we read the Bible and the way that we interpret the Bible and the way that we welcome people and the way that we treat human beings and the way that even the way that they preach and they proselytize. Some of the most powerful lessons I've ever been taught were like on TikTok. We're just like girls sitting in their car on TikTok doing their makeup, telling you about Christ, but they're just so sincere about it, and they have such they have a sincerity. They quote the Bible. They know what they're talking about, and in my mind, I think there's no way that those girls don't count because they're women and they're preaching. Like there's no way that doesn't count. There's no way that can get 2.4 million views and people commenting like, I needed to see this today. Like this brought so much love in my heart. Like I wasn't going to go to church, but now that I am, yada, yada, yada. And there's no way that doesn't count because they're women.
Yes, totally agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, anything can be a religion. Like if you act on atheism in a certain way, it can be a religion. Like and so I am not anti-God. I'm not anti-Jesus. I just see it as I'm a different religion than people who praise Jesus or who consider themselves like a Christ follower. They are respectful of me. I am respectful of them. I have no qualms if they want to pray in the same office that I'm in or on the bus that I'm in. That's no different to me than somebody who's Muslim, kneeling and doing their prayer. If it brings you joy and if it brings you peace and if it keeps you treating people decently because that's the morality that your religion has taught you, I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. The only thing I've ever seen that I thought there was anything wrong with was some of the teachings that come with specific denominations like purity culture and hating LGBT people or they're going to hell, things like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's wonderful. What do you think about Jesus now? Like, what are your thoughts about him?
I would not be surprised at all if we find remains one day that are of a prophet who we find out is the Jesus we've all been hearing about. I have no doubt he existed. You even hear about him in other religious texts that are non-Christian, right? I have no doubt in my mind that there was probably a very, very miraculous human being who probably performed what at the time were considered to be miracles. and maybe still to today's time were considered to be miracles. I don't necessarily think that he was like the son of God. I don't necessarily think that he rose again after 3 days from being dead. I think perhaps maybe he was in a coma. Like I feel like there's a lot of explanations if we had the opportunity to look at his remains, kind of get more answers. I believe that people who believe in him, I believe that people who believe him are telling the truth. And even now, sometimes, like when there's turbulence on a plane or when I just don't really know what to do, I will still pray. I don't think that it's necessarily going to God or who the Baptist church wanted me to think is God. But there's still that like peace there. There's still that peace, and you feel it's almost like meditation. You feel like I'm not alone in this. I can breathe, I can think, I can pray. But I don't think it's doing the same thing that, say, for example, my mom thinks when she prays.
Okay. So what do you think, like, let's just suppose right now you were to show up, you I don't want to even say out in the ether that you were dead, but I'll just say you were suddenly in the presence of God.
Yeah.
And Jesus is like, actually, Sydney, it was me. I was real.
Yeah.
What do you think you would say to him?
I would hope, because I've thought about this before. Like, what do I do if like I'm struck by lightning and the next thing I know I'm like in heaven, I would hope that the same God who saved me when I was 9, who I felt in my heart, who I prayed to every night, I would hope that he would at least give me the opportunity to explain why it was I felt the way that I did and understand where I'm coming from. For example, if I were to say, all I needed to really consider myself a devout Christian was maybe to hear from you or to see you or to have you speak to me, I would hope that he would say, that makes a lot of sense. Like, I'm sorry that you felt pain that I didn't speak to you in the way that you needed to be spoken to. I wouldn't be surprised if I found out he spoke to me in a million other ways and I just didn't attribute it to him speaking to me. But I would hope that he, one, understood where I was coming from and why it was that I felt that way. And I would also hope that he would have maybe some answers for me as well. Like, why did you do that to my dad? Like, why did that happen? Like, what is that purpose? And I would hope that he would take that as a learning opportunity to teach me what he was trying to teach me all that time. And for whatever reason, I wasn't getting what I needed from him.
Very cool. This is interesting that you mentioned that you think it's possible that Jesus was doing miracles.
Yeah.
And so do you in general like believe that miracles are something that happens? And if so, like what is there a mechanism for that? Like where does that come from?
I do think that fantastic things can happen. I think there is always a reason they happened. It might be a very rare reason. It might be a reason we're never going to see again in our lifetime. But for example, I have no doubt that he healed people that were thought to be unhealable. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe he had access to medicine that maybe most people had never heard of before. Or maybe he knew things like wash your hands, and because like that sounds like a joke, but literally people didn't know you were supposed to wash your hands before like performing surgery on other people until very recently. So maybe it was something like that. Maybe he just had a cleanliness, or maybe he had been somewhere where he was taught a different kind of medicine than that was allowed or that was taught where he's from. Maybe he had been somewhere in Asia. Maybe he'd been somewhere in a foreign country where he learned different herbs or different medicines. Who knows? But I have no doubt that he did things that people were shocked to see. We even have, things now, like, and I don't want to say magicians, but let's just use that for an example. People can do things like magic in front of you and just shock you and stun you. But there's always a way that they do it. There's always a reason it happened, right? And so I don't think he was out here like performing like hocus pocus magic tricks. But I do think he either was ahead of his time in whatever it was he was doing, or he did something he didn't realize was helping, like medicinally or health related or something like that he had no clue was tying into why things were working out the way that they were. And I also think some of it is just fantastic stories, like the dividing of the bread and the fish. I don't think there were as many people there as are said in the Bible. I think he managed to feed a lot of people with a small amount of food, and then the story grew over time, like the game of telephone. You know, if we can't make it around the room without the same story, we probably can't make it 2,000 years with the same story.
Right.
But I'm not one of those people that are like, oh, he never existed, that's a bunch of baloney. I have no doubt. I mean, he shows up so often in so many different versions of text, half of which don't even align with Christian theology. Like, why would they agree with us? Why would they give us that point, right? If they disagreed with us. I just think whatever it was had a reason. I think he did those things. I think he did a lot of those things. I think some of them were exaggerated. And I think the reason it's lasted so long is because what he did was just before its time.
Now, what do you think about people now like Benny Hinn? Because you loved him. So did you love him for the miracles? Did you love him for the preaching? What did you love him for?
I loved him because, so first of all, I was in like second grade, second or third grade. So he was just this, wow, like he was just like a field trip that I got to go see. But he did what we now know to be some of the performative tactics that, mega church leaders and televangelists often do. And I want to stress to people that I do not think that these televangelists are real true Christians. I don't think so. I don't look at those people and go, see, that's why I don't like Christians at all. Every group has somebody who ruins it for everyone. Every group has somebody who uses their label and ruins it forever. There's a bunch of really mean, terrible atheists out there who are mean and terrible for reasons that have nothing to do with atheism, but at the same time, they're like, also, I'm an atheist. And so everybody thinks that's what atheists are like. Same with Christianity, right? The KKK claims Christianity. When I was like my most Southern Baptist, I did not claim them. Like, we have nothing to do with them. So I do think that a televangelist is not a true Christian. I think that is somebody who has found an opportunity to make money from people who really need guidance and really need healing and really need hope. And they stole the label of Christianity from Christians and they used it just like you would sell a fake product on Amazon. So that, I think that's a huge, important distinction that I try to show to other non-religious people as well. Like, those are not Christians. Like, those are not Christians at all. They don't even begin to follow the lessons of Christianity. And it's easy to say, knowing like what I know about what Christians are taught, or at least Baptists are taught. So I think that's a huge distinction. But I think Benny Hinn I think of him the same way that I think of bad dates I went on. I got conned. I got catfished by somebody who claimed they were somebody else. And I just need to be better at looking out for who's real and who's not. And the podcast has shown me that there are so many more real, honest people out there that don't want anything from you. They never ask me for a penny of like payment to do the podcast. So many people are out there that will help you for free. They'll help you diligently. They'll help you with love. They'll help you regardless of whether or not they think you're actually going to turn to their side or not, whether you ever go to church. But unfortunately, the people who make TV and the people who make the news are the ones who use the label, make the money, then get caught doing, illegal things and scamming people.
Yeah. Well, do you know any people that you would consider true Christians who do like healing miracles and stuff through the power of Jesus?
I don't personally know
or whatever you think.
I don't personally know them. But if they did it in front of my face, I would believe them. I'd believe them. For example, I've read in the past about people who kind of scammed in that way, where they would perform like tricks and claim to be healing. I've never met anyone in real life, but at the same time, I don't feel like I put myself in a lot of situations in which I would meet somebody who does that. I talk to people on Zoom, but I don't go to revivals. I don't go to church.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean they're not out there, and that doesn't mean that they're not doing things that are miraculous. But I have yet to meet them.
Well, you're talking to one right now.
Yay! Tell me about it.
Oh, well, it might have to be a conversation for another time. But yeah, I mean, it's like been a journey that God has taken me on. I can share it with you. But I mean, for a long time, I never saw God do any miracles. I had prayed for people, like when I first got on, like excited about the Lord, I would pray for people, and I never saw anything happen. So I kind of gave up on that for like 10
Yeah.
years. Okay.
Wow.
And then like something started shifting in my thinking about God, and I started to once again pray for people, but kind of in a different way, where I actually, what shifted is that I started believing that God always wants to heal people, and that the problem, like if they like, I don't know why sometimes it doesn't happen, but I just started believing that his will is for people to be well.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then I started seeing people get well. And I still don't see as many people get well as I want to see get well.
Right. Yeah.
So this is still something I've battled with for the past like 8 to 10 years. There's been periods of time when I saw a lot of miracles, and then periods where I didn't see any, or maybe a few.
Why do you think
So
that is? What do you think was the difference?
um unbelief.
Yeah.
So like I think kind of, and actually I had a big demonstration of it a few months ago, like, and this is probably too long of a story for right now, but I God like showed me that the problem is that I don't believe. Like,
Oh,
not
interesting.
not believing in him, his love, his power, and his ability. But the thing that I'm not believing is that he will do it right now.
I mean, that's really interesting. That's like that makes sense. Like why would he perform a miracle for you if you don't believe it already? Like he hasn't even done it yet and you're already like, "Nah."
Yeah. So I'm kind of in the place where I'm like, okay, I know where I need to be, but I don't know how to get there. So
Interesting.
yeah. So I wanna be a better miracle worker. That's one of my goals in life. So,
That's
but
awesome.
yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. And
Yeah.
I think also when people hear miracles, I think there are a lot of different kinds of miracles. You know, a lot of times people think, "Oh, miracle, it means he doesn't have a leg and now he does have a leg." I think miracles can be mental. I think they can be emotional. I think, for example, if somebody just lost their mom and they don't know what to do with their life and they're lost, in that way, and a mother figure shows up, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a neighbor, and is there for them in that way. To me, that's a miracle. Like the fact that
Yes.
that person was there in the right time, in the right place. So I think I feel like a lot of argumentative atheists, when you're like, "Oh, have you ever seen a miracle?" They're like, "Well, I've never seen somebody's like arm get blown off and put back on." I think that discredits what miracles can actually be, because if you're the person who needs that miracle, you can determine whether what you were given or who you met was truly miraculous.
Yes, I love the way that you said that. That is so true. And it doesn't have to be this divide of one type of thing. It is a miracle. And maybe
Yes.
people need a definition of what a miracle is. But I mean, and maybe not everything qualifies as a miracle. Maybe it's just a work of God that's special in somebody's life.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
so
Yeah,
yeah.
for example, a few months ago, I have a dog. She's 15, and
Hmm.
she is like the love of my life. Like I love this dog. I've been through through so much with this dog. A few months ago, she almost died, and
Oh,
I was
wow.
on the phone with the emergency vet, and they were asking me about her symptoms, and every single solitary symptom they listed for this very deadly problem she had, to a T. And they would not help her for less than basically $5,000. Like they just wouldn't even see her. It had to be upfront cash, that sort of thing. And
Wow.
at the time, I had just stopped my day job and I was moving on to like podcasting. And so obviously I didn't have just like $5,000 to like give
Yeah.
in person. Um, and so I was wrecked. I thought this was the end. There was no end in sight. I didn't know what to do. Because again, they wouldn't even see her without the cash up
Mhm.
front, which is, I think, should be a crime. But anyway, so
Mhm.
I'm up with her all night long. And finally it hits 7 a.m. And I call her vet and I'm like, this is what's going on. I know it's a Saturday, it's your busiest day. Is there any chance you can see her? They were like, we're not even open yet. Bring her in. They brought her in. They did an x ray. She was totally fine. She just had to I think they told me that she had become allergic to her food and it had swelled up her intestines because she was having an allergic reaction. So she just needed to change food and take it easy and drink some water. And she didn't even have the problem that they were going to charge me upfront for. They were ready to charge me $5,000 at this other emergency vet just to even see if she had it because of like x-rays and all that. I got out of there spending $250. My dog's still alive. She's going to be totally fine. She just needs to eat this medicated food. She's been fine ever since. In that moment, that was a miracle for me. Like I was on my knees praying and like thankful that my dog, who I thought I was going to lose, and I thought I was going to lose her because of my financial issue at the time. Like I couldn't believe it. Like I just literally couldn't believe that happened. Right. Unfortunately, I didn't necessarily see God in that miracle, but I can 1000% understand if somebody did. I can 1000%. Like in my mind, it was biology. She didn't have what they thought she had. It had the same symptoms as this other problem. That's just nature and biology. But I can 1000% understand how that could be a miracle from God to somebody else. Makes perfect sense to me. The level of gratefulness that I had, I remember like I was literally grateful to like, I didn't even know who, I was just like saying it out loud. And I can totally imagine like if I believed in God, I would have been saying like thank you to him and like gratefulness to him and like loving things to him, because you just like you need to tell those feelings to somebody, right? So that's to me that was a miracle. That was there's no way she should have lived through that at all, let alone for $200.
Wow. Well, I'm glad your dog is alive.
Yeah. Oh yeah, she's alive and well.
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing your experience and your thoughts. This has been really wonderful. So I'd love to talk again. And thanks for coming on. Do you have any final words you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I really, really like your followers. Your followers have been very kind on my channel. I see how kind they are on your channel. And I think that speaks a lot for who you are as a person and as a creator when your audience and your followers are so kind, even to people who are from like a totally different mindset than you. So knowing who follows you, I just wanted to say, I know that there are a lot of devout Christians who follow you. And
no.
There's not? Really?
No.
Oh, they seem like it. They say like
no, they're all atheists, except there's like 4 or 5 Christians who watch my channel. Almost no Christians. Really? I did see Sister Princess here tonight, so she's a Christian, but almost everybody here right now is an atheist.
Oh, so I'm not watching that live stream. I'm not sure who's commenting now, but I know in like past comments. Wait, can I see the live stream? Can I see the comments?
Oh, wait, you can click.
Oh, I just clicked on it. Guys, I didn't know I could see your comments the whole time. Oh my gosh. I had no idea. I didn't know I could see the comments. I would have been paying a lot more attention to those. That's hilarious. Yeah. This is my first time on this platform, guys. StreamYard. I've never done this.
Do you want them to ask you questions? Do you want to answer questions, or do we need to save this for another time?
I mean, you tell me. This is your channel. This is your thing. I'm happy to answer their questions separately. I'm happy to do it tonight. You tell me.
Oh, well, my channel is very flexible. So if you guys have questions, you can put them in the chat right now.
I could have seen this the whole time.
Yeah. But you know what? I'm glad you didn't, because you might have been distracted. And
maybe I would have tailored my answers or something like that. I like to think I wouldn't, but yeah, basically what I was saying was you have a lot of very loving people who follow you, and they're very, very kind. And so
thank you.
I think what I would say is people shouldn't be afraid of true belief. If something puts fear in your heart, question whether or not it really is what you believe. Whether it's fear that God doesn't exist, whether it's fear that God does exist and hell is real. If something put fear into your heart, don't necessarily count that as true belief. And instead, don't be afraid to examine what it is that you believe. Do you believe that God is real? Do you believe that Jesus performed miracles? Do you believe that none of that is true? What are the options? Do your research. watch as many different YouTube channels and podcasts. It doesn't have to be mine, but if you want to, that's fine too. And figure out what it is that you truly believe and not that you're afraid to believe. Oh, I see a question here.
Yep, I'll put it up, and I will also say I have to give a little hello to one of my Christian followers, the investigative millennial. Hi, Eric. I'm glad you're here.
Name.
So there are a few Christians that watch. So the faithful few. Okay, so Brian Stevens says, question: if Sydney had to join one denomination of Christianity, which would she pick?
Denomination of Christianity.
Yeah, let's say just attending a local church or something.
If it had to be Christianity, I would probably be a Methodist. I'd probably be Methodist.
Really?
Yeah. They're like, so at least in my corner of the world, they're the more like liberal, artsy fartsy kind of Christians. They're the more, when I was a kid, we always knew the Methodist is like the fun church to go to. And we always heard like stuff about what they got to do. So I'd probably be Methodist. Unless things have changed.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow, the Christians are coming out of the woodwork. SFT's here. So he says, so now that Sydney is deconverted, she believes whales and pine trees are related through common ancestry.
I believe in evolution. Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Like
so
my
that's
parents.
Yes.
Yeah, my parents. I don't know specifically about whales and pine trees. I would need to look that one up. But like, for example, I do believe that my parents are like ancient ancestors of dinosaurs, and you can like see it in the way that they move too. But yeah, I believe in evolution. Yeah, you can see it. I swear, I live with dinosaurs. I live with velociraptors. They just also know how to question me. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, guys. Brian Stevens. Yeah, it says more questions, guys. Let's see some questions here. Okay, wait. Let's see if I started any while we were talking. I think Melody Joy just said hello. Thanks for introducing me to Sydney.
Oh, thanks.
And let's see. Okay, that's really all. I was not paying too much attention to the chat. Okay, any other questions, guys? Let's see.
No, standing for truth. My ancestors were dinosaurs. Sydney, I'm going to get that put on merch. That's going on merch. I'm going to put like that quote. My ancestors are dinosaurs. #Sydney. Done. I'll make it a mug. I will send you a kit. Standing for truth. I'll send it to you.
Yeah. You know what, Sydney? I think you will love doing live streams.
I love it. I've only done one before, and I did it with my regular laptop. But I think you've converted me to StreamYard. I think I'm going to join StreamYard.
Yeah, I think you're gonna have a lot of fun doing this because I feel like the comedian is like coming out like with the comments and stuff. Okay. So here's another question from Brian. If you were to talk to your younger self with what you know today, what would you say?
I would say to keep an open mind. I would say to make sure that I was being nice because I wanted to be nice, not because I wanted to, get more points at Awanas. I don't know if you guys had Awanas. It was like Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts for church. You get like a vest and patches and stuff. And I would say, my mom used to say, treat people the way they should be treated and let them find out you're a Christian afterward. Don't be nice to them and say, I did that because I'm a Christian, or you should come to my church now that I did this thing for you. She said, be very kind to them, be very nice to them, be a good person, be a good influence, and then let them find out that you're a Christian. And I feel the exact same way about being an atheist. I hope that people mistake me for being a religious person if they think that religious people are good and kind and do good things for people and help those who need help. And because it's not my whole identity. I didn't even talk about being an atheist on my own podcast for probably 30 episodes because I didn't want people to think there was like a bias lean in any of the episodes. I wanted to hear everybody's opinion. So I feel the same way for atheists. Be a good person, treat people the way they deserve to be treated, treat people the way that you would want to be treated, be a good influence, educate yourself, be somebody who people want to be around, and then let them find out where your ideology lies, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you've mentioned your mom a lot in this interview. It sounds like she's been a pretty big influence on you. Is
Oh yeah.
this like,
Oh
are you
yeah.
guys really close
Well, I
still?
tell people all the time, I'm like, as mad as she made me as a teenager, I would vote her for president. Like, she is super smart. She's getting her PhD right now. She's got multiple master's degrees. She came from nothing, like nothing. It's like all of the crazy, sad, like Southern dirt poor stories you hear like in media and in books. That was literally her upbringing. Like, she grew up so poor. She pulled herself up by, the infamous bootstraps. And so like even like the maddest I've ever been at her because we've had an argument, I would still cast a ballot for her, like as president. Like she is a very, very intelligent woman. And she's also very hard truth. She never let me get away with playing the victim, or she would let me have a sob moment for like 20 minutes and then be like, okay, what are you going to do about it? It's hard to complain about anybody about anything to a woman who's like husband dropped dead and she raised 2 babies by herself. Like, she doesn't want to hear that Starbucks doesn't have your favorite latte anymore. She doesn't want to hear that like, something's not going right for you. She's like, I raised 2 children by myself. So you'll get over it. You'll be fine. I promise. Yeah. So she's a very influential person in my life. We just happen to disagree when it comes to the church thing, I think. And I don't even, I don't even know if she knows that. We've never really talked about it. I think she just knows I don't really go to church anymore. Nobody send my mom this podcast or I'm going to be really upset.
Okay, so Peter W says, did you meet any famous
Second City TV people?
Yeah.
So SCTV was out by the time I was in. So I never met them. But I have met several comedians. For example, Hannibal Buress. I know Hannibal Buress. I know TJ Miller. A lot of the people that are currently on Saturday Night Live, I either taught with them or was in shows with them or was friends with them. But like the old school SCTV people, that was about 15, 20 years before my time, unfortunately. But I do wish they would bring it back. That was a good show. That was a really good show.
Cool. There's another question here. I'm trying to just scroll through and see. Okay, here's another one. Okay, I'm just trying to mark all the questions. Now, okay. Okay. So here we go. There is Investigative Millennial says, if you have time, is there any tension now that you're an atheist with family or friends from church?
What breed is my dog? She's a Staffordshire Terrier, so she's like a super short pit bull. She's got the body size of a pit bull, but her legs are only about this tall. She's a coffee table. No tension that I know of. If anybody has an issue with it so far, and similarly, I saw a question in the chat about like vitriol pushback from religious people. I actually have been given nothing but good things. Even friends of mine who are current pastors and youth pastors, they actually talk about how they like to use my podcast with their congregation because they want to know what people on my side are asking because they want to be prepared to answer that, and not even in a debate way. For example, one of my friends just talked to me this week about how it helps him understand where we're coming from, and it helps him understand what we're thinking and what our questions are. He said it makes him a better pastor because he's able to not only talk about what he believes, but he's able to really confront more difficult questions that he, on the spot might kind of catch him off a little bit. And he welcomes people who are not religious to come visit his church. And so there's honestly, I have actually, I know it sounds weird, but as a comedian on YouTube, I got vitriol and pushback and mean comments all the time. But as a YouTuber who talks about like faith and Christianity and atheism, the nicest people, even if they don't agree with me, even if they think I'm absolutely insane, they're nice and they give very constructive feedback, and they come back and they watch a lot of things and they comment on things that like maybe opinions they had that changed from one episode to the next. They recommend guests. So yeah, actually it's been super friendly. It's been a nice change, which I don't know how long that will last. So I'm enjoying it while it lasts, but so far nothing but good things.
Cool. Okay. This is kind of a question, but Praise I Am says, have you read Mark 4:15? Which I pulled it up. It's some people are like seed along the path where the word is sown. As soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes away the word that was sown in them. So it seems that he's making more of a statement than asking a question. But do you have any comments about it?
So let me ask you, what do you think that verse means? Like if I were coming to you and I was like, what does this mean? What is your interpretation of that verse?
Mine?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that Satan is kind of trying to deceive people. He is, coming along and trying to like wreck the works of God.
Yeah. I think I get what he is getting at with that verse. But I like to think that the people like me who still give Christians a platform and still give pastors a platform and still don't debate people, they don't argue with people, they ask them questions to understand. For example, tonight I spoke to 2 different Christians that are going to be on future episodes. I don't think I count as one of those, as like the devil coming to take the seed away. Maybe that's easy for me to say, but I think if the devil were truly working through me, he wouldn't allow this platform that I have to get the attention that it gets by Christians. I think my following would be 100% people who agree with me and like, oh, praise me for my ideas all the time and never ask me any hard questions. But because so many pastors that I speak to are eager to be back on for 2-3 episodes in a row, I don't think that's me. But if people think that's me, that is also their interpretation as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And there is Iron Charioteer. What is your response to Christians who say you don't believe because you just want to sin?
I challenge them to spend a day in my life and not die of boredom. I don't go out and party. I don't listen to like all the music that gets you in trouble. I literally, I am a homebody. I am an 80-year-old woman in a 31-year-old body. And if sinning is drinking flavored seltzer water and watching Netflix in my pajamas, then I don't want to be right. I don't want to live the straight and narrow. If sinning is teaching my bird words that he then uses against me, I don't want to live on the straight and narrow.
Hunter Biden's laptop says, I'm good. Just trying to pick a fight with Rebecca. I haven't seen you pick a fight with me tonight.
This is a very one-sided fight, Hunter Biden's laptops.
Yeah. So anyway, well, it has been wonderful having you on. Thanks so much, Sydney.
Thank you.
I hope we can talk again. Thanks everybody for watching and for your questions. And I hope everyone has a wonderful night.
Yeah. Thanks for everything you do.